Hey, greetings. Welcome into Tuesday, everybody. It is March 9th. This is a little bit of Power Picks brought to you by DFS Army, one-stop shopping, all things daily fantasy sports. I'm your buddy Choppadong, and we're going to dive in and talk tiers format for NHL. But the tiers format actually helps you formulate your thoughts for the bigger slates, the classic slates, maybe where the correlation is, maybe not. I want to take this to another level today. Quickly blow through the tiers, talk a little bit about what I might look at in the DFS Army NHL Research Station. In case you're interested in becoming a VIP, this unlocks for you, and you gain access to all of our cheat sheets, all of our tools, all of our coaching. You can come in one-on-one, ask me any question that you want. I will take the time necessary to turn you into a better hockey player as well. It's what I do. But more importantly, showing you this tool and how important it is to your own research and how quickly it can knock a busy time schedule down is probably the most important thing that we do is save you time. So diving in, I'm not looking at what games are great and what ones aren't today because we've already done that before in most of these videos. I will start off by locking down tier 1, Matthews, Kane, Pasta, DeBrincat. I don't obviously like it when they load teammates up like they do McDavid and Draisaitl, but you know, it is what it is. I see why they do it. They don't want you stacking all the good guys all over the place. But once I click on that tier 1, I can look at the projections inside our optimizer that are going to be inside our optimizer and see that Austin Matthews is the top projected play on the night. Patty Kane is next. He's kind of close with Pasta, so they're a little bit interchangeable. DeBrincat is well behind. That would tell me instantly Matthews for cash, Kane and Pasta, unless you're correlating something or doing something unified, which we'll cover here in a minute, you might avoid those two guys for just a little bit, unless you see a number, which I'll show you over here when I scroll to the right in the consistency ratings that makes you change your mind. But initially, this is the order that you're looking for. DeBrincat would be a GPP only type of pick and kind of a flyer at that because he does tend to do well. Obviously, Kane happens to be involved when that happens, but he's not the best player in the tier by far. When I scroll over and start looking at some of these other statistics, I can see things like implied scoring chances. 96% chance Austin Matthews scores tonight. Not necessarily a goal, although that's what that number is, but I would also put in the assists and factoring into point scoring. He has a very, very high floor. Percentage of his team scoring, Toronto is pretty balanced. Patty Kane is a lot more of the Lions' share of his team, which means that if they blow up and have 3 or 4 goals tonight, Patty Kane is doing some damage, okay? Whereas with Matthews, you can miss a little bit on it, but his floor, again, is so ridiculously high. Last 10 games, shots and blocks combined. Since they deliver the same amount of points, we like to consider that our floor in hockey. It's a little bit more predictive in terms of who is at least actively offensively minded, or in some cases with cheap defensemen, blocked shots help their floor with really, really low salaries over on Draftkings. But when it comes to kind of just a general who's always involved, this is a good number to watch. And you can see 42 shots leads the tier, but he also blocks some shots. So he's a little bit of a well-rounded two-way player. And his average DK points over the last 10 games at 24 leads the pack by a mile. So again, obvious chalk play, obvious cash play tonight in terms of Austin Matthews. This is where the majority of people should go. This is, if you're starting head-to-heads and starting 50-50s, probably the guy you just lock in and move on. Everybody else is probably rather GPP-oriented based on what you're trying to correlate or what you're trying to do around a sub-optimal narrative that is designed to generate leverage and get you up the leaderboards when the optimal narrative fails, which in hockey it does all the time. Suboptimal narratives are definitely worth pursuing in baseball and hockey when it comes to DFS. I come over here, I skip the FanDuel consistency ratings because I'm talking more about Draftkings right now, but I'm looking for 2 numbers. 10 is like the base, the lowest I would go in terms of how often do you hit 10 fantasy points. 90% of the time, Matthews has a solid floor, but so does Pasta, so does Kane, right? These guys, they're all fine for these points. That's why they're in tier 1. I'm really looking for a number like 20. And why do I do that? Hope I don't run out of time with the sidebar on my video here, but I've noticed that about 110 points is a pretty good number for tiers. When we've got, 8 tiers to deal with, if I took the 110 points divided by 8, I come off with about 13. So about 15 points is a good number, I guess I should say. But if I'm looking at 110 over 6 tiers on smaller slate nights, I'm looking at 18. So that 10 to 15 or that 15 to 20 number is really, really important when it comes to who in my tier. If I average 15 points per tier, I should cash. I should have a good night. Who is most often to hit it? So we know Austin Matthews. is top projected by a good bit. We know he's top producer over the last 10 games by a good bit. Over the last 20 games, he and Patty Kane are hitting that 20-point mark most often. Of course, DeBrincat's in there with him, and Pasta's a little bit behind the curve. But when we come over here, we see how do things shift. Look at DeBrincat lately. Great GPP pick. Because recently, Patty Kane and DeBrincat are the only ones in the last 5 games that have hit 20 points. Over the last 10 games, they're a little bit lower on the totem pole. So if you're looking for small samples, who's hot, who's not, you'd lean towards these last 5 numbers. If you're looking more trend-wise, longer term, maybe a little bit more sustainable, you're looking at the 10 and the 20 game numbers. But this is something that you go through yourself and you figure out who makes the most sense for what I'm trying. And I would recommend don't change every day. Don't use 20 game numbers one day and then 5 game numbers the next day and then go back to 20 and then try 10. If you're trying things out for only one day at a time, you're always chasing your tail. You have to build a sample size, 20 to 25 slates at least, and you need to sit in there and you need to watch the numbers. If they fail after 20 slates, at least you know they suck and you can move on and try something different. But just because it fails the first 3 or 4 times doesn't mean it doesn't work. And then you would shift off of that idea and get onto something else that really doesn't work when you were on something that did work the whole time. Give it time. You want to experience a good run and you want to experience a bad run using your same system before you try to evaluate and make big changes, okay? That's just a tip for you. Now, when I go back to tier 2, so I mean, like I said, Austin Matthews is clearly number 1 in this tier. But you could argue DeBrincat for recency and some other things as well. Ovechkin, top projected player, Marner, Bergeron, Marchand behind. Now, if you want to correlate with Pasta, then you're using Bergeron or Marchand, right? So if you wanted to slide over and take a look, again, skipping all those other numbers at the consistency, who's typically, there's Marchand typically over 20 points more often than Bergeron right now, right? And over 20 games, so a lot of these, Bergeron's cooled off. He was running good 10 and 15 games ago. He's running a little bit cold right now. Marchand's the better pair with a Pastrnak if that's who you're going to use. But in the overall scheme of things, your highest floor is Alexander Ovechkin, most likely. But your highest ceiling right now, well, Ovi had a good game last time out, but your highest floor might also be considering Marchand. And if you're pairing with Pasta, it makes a ton of sense. If you're looking for pure floor, it's Ovechkin, cash games, etc. If you're looking for somebody to pair with Pasta or to get exposure to Austin Matthews and then a Boston skater, I would choose Marchand over Bergeron right now, just the way the two are playing. And it may flip back and forth. Bergeron would be more of the contrarian play. Philip Forsberg, Philippe Forsberg, Barkov, Stamkos, Hedman, Scheifele. Again, with 2 Tampa guys, you'd have to make a choice on, but right now, Forsberg is the more consistent player, or at least the one projected to score more points. Barkov's close behind. A little bit of Stamkos if you're really into Tampa Bay, Scheifele if you're into Winnipeg. Scroll over here and take a quick peek at these numbers here, and we can see that Barkov has the floor. It's pretty obvious to see right across the face of it. He's getting the same 70% of the time, but more often than Forsberg is Barkov going over 15, 20, and 25-point barriers, okay? And over bigger samples too. Barkov, to me, is the clear-cut guy in this tier for a combination of both floor and ceiling. And that's what I really like to look at when it comes to cash games, is who has the floor and who also has upside. Because they're not all going to hit their floor every night, and when they don't, then I've got a chance for somebody to save me with a big game and make up for somebody else's losses. Josie, Couture, Ehlers, Hamilton, JVR, Trocheck. Watch Trocheck. He's been a stalwart for me lately. Even though he's lower projected, sometimes we can use those numbers over on the right to override those projections. And you also want to pay attention here to the power plays and the lines. If you're correlating, make sure that Nikolai Ehlers and Mark Scheifele correlate if you're going to pick both of them. If they don't correlate, you're really just using 2 different one-offs. Scheifele on line 1 in power play 1, Ehlers on line 2 in power play 2 are not sharing the ice together ever. So you're using them as 2 one-offs. They do not correlate. And we'll go through that hopefully here in just a minute at the end. As I'm trying to power through these tiers for you, but still deliver some decent information that you can hang your hat on tonight. Looking for greens across the board. Van Riemsdyk isn't terrible. Bigger numbers. Ehlers, Josie are all okay. These other guys start to drop off a little bit, but then recently, Couturier is picking it up. right? And these other guys, so it's a pretty wide open tier if you really, really look at it. If you're really dying for a floor, like in a cash game with only 4 or 5 or 6 people in it, you might take a Trocheck because 70% of the time he's hitting at least 10 points. And that does obviously help you in a more wide open tier. But these guys here are testing ceilings a little bit more, 15 and 20 points and beyond. So if you get a guy 60% like a Couturier that's still getting above and beyond that, that may tip your hat or tip your scales towards deciding on him. Neither one is an incorrect choice. It just comes down to which one you feel makes the most sense for what you're doing tonight. Kyle Connor, one of the top goal scorers in the league. I like to use him as much as I can. Aho when he's hot. Tavares is interesting. You could pair him with Matthews on power play 1 and get a little correlation going, and then you got access to both big scoring lines in Toronto, which would be fairly interesting. You can see same 44% chance to score, I guess I should say, of team scoring, implied team scoring, is Tavares, 35%. So if you got 35% Tavares and 44% Matthews, you've got about 75 to 80% chance that one of these guys is going to factor into some goals. That helps with your floor. Anders Lee, Braden Point, Wheeler, Sorelli. See, Wheeler would correlate with Scheifele, line 1, power play 1. This Sebastian Aho is the defenseman. Do not use him. He sucks. He's not DFS relevant. He pulls in just based on the name and an auto data feed. You want the Aho in Carolina, not the New York Islanders Aho all the time. That's just a glitch that we've never been able to get rid of. But when I slide over here, Blake Wheeler's playing well. Kyle Connor's playing well. Okay, so you can start deciding again, looking at these numbers. Which makes most sense to you? Are you after your absolute floor of 10, or are you after more of a floor plus ceiling combo in the 15 to 20? If so, you're probably leaning towards a Blake Wheeler with the way he's been playing over the last 10 games. You double check with the last 5 games, still doing pretty well. Maybe a Sebastian Aho's turning it up a notch, so you may save him for later until he really gets hot. You may use I would use a Connor or a Wheeler in this tier. Unless, again, I was doing something crazy with, Tampa Bay and Sorelli, or Toronto and Matthews and Tavares combined. Looking at tier 6, Eichel, Carlson, Atkinson, Backstrom, Barzal, Svechnikov. Farabee's an interesting play every night. He pairs up with Couturier, who's hot, and his numbers recently are showing it as he's popping into the list here. Cam Atkinson is starting to drop off, in my opinion, a little bit, but you might want to watch that to make sure. He ran hot there for a little while, and he may be coming down off of his buzz. Jack Eichel and Carlson practically unusable. Mark Backstrom as well. Barzal, Svechnikov, none of these guys are exciting me. To me, it's Farabee or bust out of that tier. Has been for a week or more. Come down to tier 7. Line A, Hornquist. Usually Hornquist has a shot floor. Giroux, McAvoy. McAvoy's been solid. So you can see here, McAvoy has some good baseline floor numbers, but no ceiling. He's kind of capped. If you want the ceiling guys, you've got to be paying more attention to like your Giroux, Ekblad. Ekblad's interesting. He's been hot. Kevin Hayes, guys that can score. Because McAvoy's not scoring goals. He's factoring into some assists, and he's got a shot and block floor like we talk about. So, again, he's a decent cash game type of play, but you're not going to get a very high likelihood of him repairing any damage from other tiers that falter on you. So for me, it's kind of a Giroux, a Hayes, maybe even a Hornquist type. And then we'll look at tier 8, which is usually wide open. Nylander, if you're doing Toronto, Kubalik, Chicago. Pavelski's hard to beat right now. The year that guy's having is hard to beat. And it shows in his numbers, generally going back over the 20 games. And he's been okay here recently, but he's not phenomenal. He had a good game last time out. But generally speaking, in this tier of the larger sample, Pavelski's your guy. So that's who I would lean on unless I was correlating with other stuff. Now, what I wanted to do is I want to turn off the tiers here really quick with the little bit of time that I have left. And I want to show you how you would correlate stacking with tiers. You turn off the blank by holding the control button down. Turn that. What did it just do? Let me pause the video. All right, now that I've got that turned off, I've got all of my tiers on. I can go team by team, and I can look at the correlation. Line 1, power play 1, line 1, power play 1, line 1, power play 1. D1, which correlates. These guys all tier 1, tier 2, tier 7 correlate. If I wanted to look at Chicago, I can do the same thing. Kane and DeBrincat correlate. Kubalik does not. If I wanted to look at Philly, Couturier, Riemsdyk, they correlate. So does Farabee. The other two do not, but they correlate together in Giroux and Hayes. Hopefully that helps you guys. That's how you do this. We'll talk.